car was in the parking lot. Everybody hit the slips again. There was a giant search that went into darkness. Then they called in the police and search and rescue personnel, and they were searching for him for 6 days. 7,000 hours was contributed with search dogs and other firefighters. He's found February 13th, 6 days later, in California at a Sacramento airport rental car area. Now, he was wearing his ski clothes and still had his ski helmet. He told the sheriff that he thought he had some type of head injury, but he wasn't sure. And he was dropped in downtown Sacramento by a trucker. And he was asked to describe the trucker, and he said he couldn't. He goes, I really can't remember. I think I slept most of the time or something. Well, in that time, since February, no trucker has ever come forward saying he gave him a ride. Danny has no memory of what happened. But when he got into Sacramento, it was kind of strange. He got a haircut. He bought a new iPhone because he didn't have his, and he called his wife from Sacramento. Now, he did go back and he met with New York State Police in Lake Placid, and they didn't release a lot of information about what happened. And he was initially under some medical care, but soon after this, he was cleared and he went back to work at Toronto Fire. This is a fascinating story because you have someone, and I don't know if people know this, but to be a fireman or a policeman in a metropolitan area of Canada or the U.S., you've got to go through a series of psychological tests. So this guy isn't some wacko guy. He's a very stable guy to be a captain in Toronto. And he was as perplexed as anybody about what happened to him. And they interviewed one of the sheriff's deputies from Sacramento that first had contact with him, and he said, no, the guy was not right. Something was wrong, and he knew it. And he felt bad that he couldn't explain himself. So I don't know what happened, but I think it's odd. He did give an interview to, I think, CTV, but he didn't say a lot in the interview. He said almost all the things I just said, that he was concerned and he didn't know. And I think that if I was in that position, I don't know if I would talk to anybody about it because I'd be embarrassed. Because I couldn't answer for myself. And I think that if this truly happened like he said, and it happened to you, I think you'd be not only embarrassed, but disturbed that it happened. And this is a strange one. 30 years old, profile points are weathers and canines. And there's more people missing in Nova Scotia than logically should be. But when you see the amount of water that surrounds this area, and you think about what I've said in the past, water comes into play. Well, Marty left his home in Halifax May 29th and drove to a remote region northeast of Waverly. And he drove to a location called Spider Lake, and he parked at the dead end of this dirt road. Well, he was a big guy, 6 foot, 260. He got out his mountain bike, took off riding down the trail. And he had told his family that when he left at noon that he'd be back at about 4 o'clock. Well, when he didn't arrive home, the family drove to the lake, knew where his car would be, and found it there at 8:30 at night. They immediately got on the phone, called in a missing person report, and the RCMP responded. The area could best be described as super thick with swamps, lakes, and burrows, a very thick bush around the swamps. Well, the formal search was orchestrated by RCMP, started the following day, May 30th, and the articles described it as one of the largest search and rescues in the history of Nova Scotia. 3 helicopters, 450 searchers, boats, planes, search dogs. One of the helicopter pilots was interviewed, and he said, hey, I've been on a lot of searches. I've never seen anything this huge. So they were throwing a lot of resources at finding Marty. The commanders stated that they covered 60 square kilometers with multiple helicopters multiple times, covering land, swamps, and lakes. And they used the helicopters with FLIR looking for a heat signature. They found none. The Canadian military even sent 200 soldiers that walked the bush and swamps. It was one of those weird days out there in Nova Scotia. It was 90 plus for 5 days in a row, and it exhausted the searchers. When the SAR was eventually ended, The commander stated they had not located anything. So the question is, why didn't FLIR pick up a heat signature of Marty? Why didn't canines that were there pick up a scent? Why didn't 200 soldiers find anything related to the victim? And it's now been 5 years, and nothing's ever been found. I don't think in this area, because it's pretty flat. Streams usually have where there's gravity and the water can go somewhere. Here it's pretty flat. You know, here's a little story for you. Earlier this year, there was a special on TV, and you can watch it on Amazon. It was done by the History Channel, and it was a 2-hour special about my work. And it was called Vanished. And if you Google it on Amazon, I think you can watch it for like $2. It's a 2-hour special. It has really good reviews. Well, the company that did that was Prometheus Productions, that I worked with for 6 months to do that. It's also Prometheus Productions that does the Oak Island. And we used to have all kinds of talks about the disappearances in Nova Scotia and if they were related somehow to what's going on there. So it's interesting you brought that up. So he's from Melbourne, Australia. He was a physicist working at the Atomic Energy of Canada Deepwater Labs, and he was doing research on radioisotopes, and he was an expert on powder diffraction. And I actually looked up what powder diffraction was, and it was so many big words, I didn't understand it, and there's probably somebody in your brilliant audience that did, but I couldn't pronounce the words, so I'm not going to try. But on January 18, 2010 at 4:30, Lackland was seen getting on a bus at the labs, expected to be home. On January 23rd, 5 days later, he was expected at a curling championship at Deep River Curling Club, where he was the vice president. He wasn't there. Club member calls RCMP, and they go to Lackland's home. What they find is they find his garbage can sitting at the curb line in a typical housing tract that sits 1,000 feet southwest of the Ottawa River. And the city of Deep River sits just northeast of Algonquin Provincial Park. Officers found the front door unlocked, Lackland not home, car in the garage. His personal items, including a GPS unit, keys, and a wallet, were found on the counter in the home along with his personal computer. The garbage cans were outside, and they were placed outside on January 18th, or the night he would have gotten home. The RCMP called for search teams immediately, surrounded the home, the neighborhood, everything. They didn't find anything. A ski club checked nearby trails, didn't find anything. It was January 23rd, everything was frozen solid. They bring in the canines to track the scent. They don't track anything leaving the home, and there's no tracks leaving the home. So they put locals out near the streets, the harbors, and the river. They don't see anything. Police stated that the river was frozen solid with only a few open patches in the marina, and you could only see those if you're in a helicopter. At the time Lackland vanished, the ice was 4 feet thick, according to the RCMP. Lackland's brother, Rupert, flew in from Melbourne. The brother made this statement to the news: "The circumstances of the disappearance are just bizarre. I talked to lots of locals, and they think something extraordinary happened to him." End of quotes. Nothing happened on this case for 6 months. June 11, 2010, 2 canoeists were in Welsh's Bay east of Deep River Marina and found a floating body in 2.5 feet of water. The coroner stated it was Lackland. He was found wearing his work coat and lab ID. No cause of death was ever released by the coroner. The brother stated that the police have no clue what happened to his brother. Some believe that he went for a walk at 11:30 p.m. on a frigid January night. Refer to Missing 411 as sobering coincidence. This book that I wrote chronicles a series of smart men who all disappeared and were found in bodies of water, many unknown cause of death. And that's all this book is about. Young, intelligent men who disappeared. Nobody saw them disappear, and they were later found in a body of water. So I wrote about the smiley face killers in the book I wrote, and what I stated was they wrote about maybe 12 cases. I wrote about 60 cases. And never in any of those 60 cases was there a smiley face ever found in any of the scenes I wrote about. But the detectives that started that case, it was a detective out of New York, did something brilliant. And he started to pay attention to these missing person cases, just like I am. And he was working in New York, and somebody disappeared in one part of New York, but his body's found upstream, upriver from where he disappeared. He said, how did that body get upriver? It should be downriver. And then they started doing autopsies, and they couldn't figure out a cause of death, and et cetera, et cetera. All of these people were ending up in water that made no sense.